The sky bled crimson that morning in 1884, as if the desert itself knew what was coming. Emma Hayes felt the rough rope bite deep into the soft skin of her throat. Her boots scraped uselessly against the wooden platform as dozens of hands shoved her forward. The noose was already tight. Too tight. Murderer, traitor. You sold us out to the train robbers. The voices crashed over her like thunder rolling across the Arizona plains. Iron Junction's town square, usually quiet at dawn, had turned into a sea of angry faces and clenched fists. They called her the woman who helped derail the gold train, the one that killed 14 men, including her own father. Emma's heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. Her wrists were bound behind her back. The morning wind whipped strands of dark hair across her eyes, but she refused to lower her head. Not yet. She had spent the last 3 nights awake, staring at the ceiling of her small wooden house, replaying the moment they dragged her father's broken body from the wreckage. The guilt they threw at her wasn't just words anymore. It had become a living thing, wrapping around her chest tighter than this noose. A man she barely recognized stepped onto the platform. His face was red with righteous fury. "Emma Hayes, you stand accused of betraying this town and causing the death of your own blood. May God have mercy on your soul. Because we won't." He kicked the stool. The world dropped. For one terrifying second, Emma felt weightless. The rope snapped taut. Pain exploded in her neck. Her feet kicked wildly in empty air. Black spots burst across her vision. She heard her own choking gasp. A sound so small and broken, it terrified her more than the screaming crowd. Then, a gunshot cracked through the square, like lightning splitting an old oak. The rope above her head exploded in a spray of frayed fibers. Suddenly, she was falling. Emma hit the hard-packed dirt with a heavy thud. Dust flew up around her. She gasped desperately for air, coughing violently as the loosened noose still hung around her bruised neck. Her bound hands scraped against the ground. Every breath burned like fire. Hooves thundered close. A big bay stallion slid to a stop just feet away, spraying dirt across her face. She looked up. A tall man in a black duster sat straight in the saddle rifle, still smoking in his hands. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that made the whole square go silent. Colt Ramsey. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath at the sight of him. He swung down from the horse in one smooth motion and walked toward her. The crowd parted instinctively, some stepping back in fear, others muttering curses under their breath. Everyone in Iron Junction knew the name Colt Ramsey, former Pinkerton detective. Now the most powerful railroad contractor in the territory, a man whispered to carry death wherever he went. Colt crouched beside Emma. His gloved hands moved carefully as he loosened the noose completely and pulled it over her head. For a brief moment, his fingers brushed the raw skin of her throat. She flinched. "You're safe now," he said, voice low and steady like distant thunder over the mountains. There was no softness in it, only quiet certainty. Emma stared up at him, chest heaving. Tears she refused to let fall burned behind her eyes. Her voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Why? Why did you do that?" Colt didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, studying her face, as if searching for something he had lost a long time ago. Then he rose to his full height and turned to face the stunned crowd. His voice carried across the square calm, but carrying the weight of cold iron. "Any man, or woman, who lays another hand on Emma Hayes will answer to me." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the people. She kept her eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead, refusing to look at the faces that watched them pass. When they reached the little house on the edge of Iron Junction, Colt helped her down without a word. His gloved hand lingered a second longer than necessary on her arm before he let go. "You should rest," he said quietly. Emma nodded once, but her voice wouldn't come. She watched him swing back into the saddle, his broad shoulders cutting a sharp silhouette against the rising sun. He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned the stallion and rode away, leaving her standing alone in front of her own door. She stepped inside. The silence hit her harder than any shout in the square. No customers waited on the porch. The small front room where she sold herbs, tonics, and simple remedies was empty. The shelves looked untouched, as if the whole town had decided overnight that even breathing the same air as her was dangerous. Emma closed the door behind her and leaned against it, eyes closed. Her fingers trembled as she touched the angry red marks circling her neck. The rope had left its signature, a promise that next time they might not miss. A soft knock came from the back. She froze. "Miss Emma." A small, hesitant voice called. "It's me, Tommy." She opened the door just enough to let the 12-year-old boy slip inside. Tommy Reed's face was dirty, his shirt torn at the shoulder. A fresh bruise bloomed under his left eye. "They said, 'I can't work for you no more,'" he whispered, eyes darting toward the window. "Called me a traitor's helper. Kicked me out of the alley behind the saloon. Said if I come back here, they'll do worse." Emma's heart twisted. She knelt down slowly, ignoring the pain in her neck, and gently touched the boy's bruised cheek. "I'm sorry, Tommy," she said, voice still raw and hoarse. "You don't have to stay. It's not safe." The boy shook his head fiercely, though his lips trembled. "I ain't got nowhere else. You're the only one who ever gave me real work. And didn't look at me like I was trash." Before Emma could answer, heavy footsteps sounded on the boardwalk outside. She rose quickly and peeked through the curtain. Ruth Harlan stood in the middle of the street, dressed in a fine dark dress with a silver brooch at her throat. The town's mayor and owner of the only bank in Iron Junction. Her voice rang out clear and sharp, carrying to every open window. "People of Iron Junction, we cannot allow poison to grow in our midst. Emma Hayes has brought shame and danger upon us all. She threatens the railroad, the very future that will bring prosperity to our children. Any man or woman who continues to do business with her stands against progress itself." Emma stepped back from the window, feeling the words land like stones against her chest. One by one, the few neighbors who had still nodded at her in passing now turned their faces away. Doors that once opened with a smile slammed shut. The isolation settled over her like thick desert dust, suffocating, impossible to brush off. That night the threats began. First came the rock through the front window, shattering glass across her work table. A note was tied around it, "Leave or burn." Then the whispers outside her door after midnight. Footsteps that stopped just beyond the porch. Once she thought she heard someone scratching at the back wall, like they were testing how easy it would be to break in. Emma sat on the edge of her narrow bed, a shotgun across her lap that she barely knew how to use. Every creak of the old house made her flinch. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stool kicked away, felt the rope tightening again. The injustice burned deep. She had lost her father to that wrecked train. She had tried to keep her head down, heal the sick with what little knowledge her mother left her. And yet the town had decided she was the enemy. Why? A soft tapping came at her back window just before dawn. Emma's hands tightened on the shotgun. She moved carefully, heart pounding, and eased the curtain aside. An old man stood in the shadows. Jeremiah Gray, the quiet Apache blacksmith who kept to himself at the edge of town. His weathered face was half hidden by long gray hair, but his eyes were steady. He pressed something small into her hand, through the cracked window. A folded piece of paper worn at the edges. "Your father wasn't what they say," he whispered, voice like dry wind over stone. "This might be the first real truth. Keep it hidden. Trust no one yet." Before Emma could ask anything, Jeremiah melted back into the darkness. She unfolded the paper with shaking fingers. It was a torn page from an old ledger with numbers and a single line written in her father's familiar handwriting. "Ruth Harlan knows the real cargo." She paid for silence. Emma stared at the words until they blurred. The rope around her neck had been cut, but the chain of suspicion was tightening once more. This time it felt colder, heavier, and somewhere out there in the dark, Colt Ramsey was watching. Not close enough to comfort her, but close enough that she could feel his shadow stretching across her fear. The desert wind carried the scent of creosote and danger that night. Emma Hayes slipped out the back door of her house just after midnight, a dark shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The burns on her neck still throbbed with every heartbeat. She moved like a shadow between the scattered mesquite trees, following the faint glow of a lantern someone had left hanging on an old fence post. 3 figures waited for her in the dry wash behind the blacksmith shop. Colt Ramsey stood slightly apart, arms crossed his black duster, blending into the darkness. Deputy Finn McCoy shifted nervously his badge, catching what little moonlight there was. And Jeremiah Gray sat on a rock, his weathered hands resting on the barrel of an old rifle. No one spoke at first. Emma's eyes met Colt's across the small space. She still remembered the feel of his hand steadying her after the noose had been cut. Part of her wanted to trust that steadiness. Another part, the one still raw from the rope and the town's hatred, pulled back. "We can't keep meeting like this," Finn whispered, voice tight with worry. "If Ruth finds out..." "She already suspects," Jeremiah said quietly. His voice was calm like wind over stone. "That's why we move careful." They spread out the torn ledger page Emma had received from Jeremiah. Under the weak lantern light, Colt studied the numbers and the single line in her father's handwriting. "Ruth Harlan knows the real cargo," Colt read aloud, low and slow. She paid for silence. Emma felt her stomach twist. She pressed a hand to her mouth as memories flooded in, uninvited. Her father's tired smile the night before the train left. The way he had hugged her a little too long, as if he knew something was wrong. "I thought he died in an accident," she whispered, voice cracking. "They told me it was just bad track and bandits. But this..." Colt looked up at her. For the first time, something softened behind those steel-gray eyes. "Your father wasn't the only one who knew too much," he said. His jaw tightened and he looked away into the darkness. "I left the Pinkertons because of a case like this. A railroad job in Colorado. They wanted me to bury the truth so the company could keep laying track. When I refused, they made sure I took the blame. Lost my badge. Lost nearly everything." The silence that followed was heavy. Emma searched his face, trying to read whether this man who had saved her life was telling the truth, or simply weaving another layer of lies around her. Deputy Finn broke the tension. "We need more than one page," he said. "I can get into the bank records at night, but I need cover." Colt nodded once. "I'll ride patrol near the bank. Make it look like I'm still hunting bounties." Emma hesitated, then spoke. "I'll talk to Tommy. He runs errands for half the town. If anyone has seen something at the station or the bank. She didn't finish the sentence. The thought of putting the boy in danger made her chest ache. 2 nights later, they met again, this time in an abandoned line shack 5 miles outside town. Tommy Reed was already there when Emma arrived, his small frame huddled near the dying fire. His eyes were wide with fear. "I heard them talking," the boy said, voice shaking. "At the saloon. Mr. Harlan's men, they said the gold on that train wasn't all lost. Some of it went into a special account. Ruth Harlan's account. They laughed about how easy it was to blame the wreck on your pa, Miss Emma." Emma knelt in front of him, her hands gently holding his thin shoulders. "You're sure, Tommy?" He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "But they saw me listening. One of them grabbed me. Said if I opened my mouth again, they'd make sure I joined the ghosts on that wrecked train." The fear in the boy's voice hit Emma like a physical blow. She pulled him into a quick, fierce hug, feeling his small body tremble against hers. This child had already lost so much. Now he was risking what little he had left. For her. Colt stood by the door listening. When Tommy finished, he stepped closer. "You did good, kid," he said, his tone gentler than Emma had ever heard. "But from now on, you stay close to the blacksmith shop. Jeremiah will watch over you." Jeremiah Gray gave a single nod, his old eyes steady. As the meeting broke up, Emma found herself walking beside Colt toward the horses. The others had gone ahead. For a moment, only the sound of their boots on dry earth filled the night. "You didn't have to save me that morning," Emma said, suddenly stopping in the moonlight. "Why did you?" Colt turned to face her. The wind tugged at the brim of his hat. "Because I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet," he answered. "I stayed quiet once. Cost a woman her life. I won't make that mistake again." His words hung between them. Emma felt something fragile stir in her chest. A tiny spark of trust. But right behind it came the doubt, sharp as a knife. How could she let herself lean on a man whose past was soaked in shadows? A man the whole territory still whispered about. Colt seemed to sense her hesitation. He reached out, but stopped short of touching her. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely," he said quietly. "Not yet. Just don't push me away when you need help." Emma looked down at the ground, then back up into those gray eyes. "I'm trying," she whispered. "But every time I close my eyes, I still feel that rope." A long silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound echoed across the empty land, lonely and haunting. Colt finally stepped back. "Get some rest, Emma. Tomorrow we dig deeper." As she watched him ride away into the night, Emma felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. Fear, grief, a fragile, dangerous hope. The truth was starting to surface. But every piece they uncovered seemed to pull them all closer to the edge of a cliff. And she wasn't sure who would fall first. A single scream tore through the quiet night. Emma Hayes bolted upright in bed, heart slamming against her ribs. She grabbed the shotgun and ran barefoot toward the front door, just as Colt Ramsey burst inside, rain streaming off his duster. "Finn's been hit," he said, voice low and urgent. They left him for dead behind the bank. Deputy Finn McCoy lay slumped across the back of Colt's horse blood, soaking his shirt. His breathing came in shallow, wet gasps. Emma's hands shook as she helped carry him inside, pressing cloth against the deep knife wound in his side. He was getting too close, Colt muttered while Emma worked. Found records showing money moving from the wrecked train straight into Ruth Harlan's private account. Finn's eyes fluttered open for a moment. He grabbed Emma's wrist with surprising strength. Don't. Trust the ceremony, he whispered. She's planning something big. Then he slipped back into unconsciousness. There was no time to hesitate. Before dawn broke, Colt and Emma moved fast. They loaded Tommy Reed and Jeremiah Gray onto horses and rode hard into the desert, heading for an old forgotten line shack hidden deep in a narrow canyon. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the ground to slick mud and washing away their tracks. Inside the cramped shack, the lantern flickered weakly against the storm. Tommy huddled close to Jeremiah, eyes wide with fear. The old blacksmith sat quietly, his gnarled hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. Emma knelt beside Finn, who was now bandaged and resting on a makeshift cot. Her throat felt tight every time she looked at the deputy's pale face. Colt stood by the small window, watching the rain hammer the desert floor. Jeremiah finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy. It's time you heard the rest. He pulled an old folded map from inside his coat and spread it on the rough table. Ruth Harlan didn't just want control of the railroad, he said. She made a deal with the outlaws who hit that train. They were supposed to take the gold and make sure the wreck looked like a simple robbery. But your father, Emma, he found out. She threatened him, offered him money to stay quiet and help cover the tracks. When he tried to back out at the last minute, the train went off the rails anyway. Emma stared at the map, the lines blurring as tears filled her eyes. My father, he took money from her. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. All this time she had believed he was an innocent victim. Now the truth cut deeper than the rope ever had. Jeremiah nodded slowly. He was scared, like a lot of men in this town. But in the end, he tried to stop it. That's why they made sure he was on that train when it derailed. A sob broke from Emma's chest before she could stop it. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the rough wooden wall. The pain was raw, overwhelming. The man she had mourned, the father she had defended, had been caught in Ruth Harlan's web. Colt watched her silently, his own hands clenched at his sides. I've been hunting men like her for years, he said, voice rough. My last case, I let the company bury the truth to protect their profits. A woman died because I chose the easy path. I swore I'd never do that again. He stepped closer to Emma, but stopped short, giving her space. I want to burn Ruth Harlan to the ground for what she did to you, to your father, to all of us. But if I go after her for revenge, I might lose you in the crossfire. Emma turned to face him, tears still wet on her cheeks. Then don't do it for revenge, she whispered. Do it for the living. For Tommy. For Finn. For whatever is left of this town. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the shack in harsh white light. In that moment, something shifted between them. The fragile trust they had been building cracked open and began to grow stronger even as the storm raged. Colt exhaled slowly. Tomorrow is the railroad dedication ceremony, he said. Ruth will be there smiling for the crowd. That's where we end this. The rain pounded harder against the roof as they made their final plan. Hours later, under a sky still dark with storm clouds, they rode back toward Iron Junction. The town square had been transformed with banners and lanterns for the big celebration. A temporary stage stood near the newly laid tracks, bright with flags and polished brass. Ruth Harlan stood at the center of it, all dressed in elegant black, addressing the crowd with a warm, confident smile. Emma, Colt, Jeremiah, and a weakened but determined Finn moved through the edge of the gathering, staying hidden among the wagons and horses. As Ruth raised her hands to quiet the cheering townspeople, Colt stepped forward first. His voice cut through the rain like a whip. "Ruth Harlan, you stand accused of conspiracy, theft, and murder." The crowd gasped. Ruth's smile faltered for half a second, then returned colder than before. She turned to face Colt, her eyes gleaming with something dark and certain. "You have no proof, Mr. Ramsey," she said sweetly. "Just the word of a disgraced detective, and a woman the town already wanted to hang." Then her mask slipped completely. The warm voice vanished. In its place was ice. "I built this town," she hissed loud enough for the front rows to hear. "The railroad, the bank, the future, all of it. I did what was necessary. A few deaths, a few bribes. They mean nothing when progress demands sacrifice. This territory belongs to those strong enough to take it." A shocked silence fell over the square. Emma stepped out beside Colt, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You threatened my father. You paid him to betray his own conscience. And when he tried to stop you, you killed him." Ruth's eyes narrowed with pure contempt. "He was weak, just like the rest of you." At that moment, Tommy Reed pushed through the crowd, holding up the ledger pages and the torn map. "I saw it," the boy cried, voice shaking but clear. "I heard them talking about the gold." Jeremiah Gray stood tall behind him, rifle in hand, his presence a quiet wall of strength. Finn McCoy, leaning heavily on a crutch, raised his badge. "It's over, Ruth." The rain continued to fall, washing across the stage like tears the town had never allowed itself to shed. Ruth Harlan stood exposed at last. No longer the respected mayor, but a cold, calculating woman willing to burn everything down to keep her power. Emma felt the years of grief, fear, and shame rise up inside her like a wave. But this time, the wave didn't drown her. It carried her forward. The storm had passed, leaving the Arizona sky a brilliant, merciless blue. Sunlight beat down on the newly laid railroad tracks as the entire town of Iron Junction gathered for the dedication ceremony. Banners snapped in the hot wind. Brass instruments glinted. But the air felt thick, charged with something heavier than celebration. Colt Ramsey stood at the edge of the crowd, his black duster replaced by a clean white shirt. Emma Hayes walked beside him, head high. The rope burns on her neck faded to faint pink lines. Behind them came Deputy Finn McCoy, still moving slowly with a bandage visible beneath his jacket, and Jeremiah Gray, tall and silent, like an old desert guardian. Ruth Harlan stood on the raised platform, smiling graciously as she prepared to cut the ribbon. Colt didn't wait for her to speak. He stepped forward, boots loud on the wooden planks, and his voice rang out clear and steady across the square. "Before this town celebrates progress, he said it needs to face the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ruth's smile tightened. "Mr. Ramsey," she called sweetly, "this is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time," Emma interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. She climbed the steps and stood beside Colt. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up the folded ledger pages and the torn map. "Ruth Harlan paid to have the gold train derailed," Emma said. "She bribed my father to stay silent. When he tried to stop her, she made sure he died with the others. 14 men lost their lives so she could line her own pockets." Gasps rose from the crowd. Some women clutched their children closer. Ruth lifted her chin eyes, flashing with righteous anger. "These are lies from a desperate woman," she cried, her voice rising with practiced passion. "I have served this town with faith and sacrifice. The Lord knows my heart is pure. These outsiders, this disgraced detective and his Indian friend, They want to tear down everything we've built. Her words stirred a few uncertain nods from the older townsfolk. Then a small figure pushed through the crowd. Tommy Reed climbed onto the platform, his thin shoulders squared despite the fear in his eyes. His voice shook at first, but grew clearer with every word. "I heard them," he said, pointing straight at Ruth. "At the saloon. Your men laughed about the gold. They said Miss Emma's pa tried to back out. So you made sure the train went off the rails. I was there. I heard every word." The boy's courage hit the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. Jeremiah Gray stepped up next, placing a steady hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I worked on that train," he said quietly. "I saw the changes Ruth Harlan ordered in the cargo manifest. She didn't just want money. She wanted power no one could challenge." Deputy Finn McCoy raised his badge even as pain etched lines around his mouth. "I have the bank records," he announced. Money from the stolen gold flowed straight into Ruth Harlan's accounts. This isn't rumor anymore. This is proof. Ruth's face changed. The warm, godly mask cracked and fell away completely. Her eyes turned cold, calculating, almost venomous. "You fools," she hissed, no longer hiding behind scripture. "I kept this town alive. Without me, there would be no railroad, no bank, no future. A few deaths, a few bribes. That is the price of building something lasting. Weak men like Emma's father always break. I simply helped them along." A heavy silence fell over the square. Then the crowd began to shift. Whispers turned to angry mutters. Men who had once cheered for Ruth now looked at her with dawning horror. Sheriff's deputies moved in from the sides. Ruth tried to step back, but strong hands caught her arms. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she glared at Emma one last time. "You think this is justice," she spat. "You'll always be the woman they wanted to hang." Emma met her gaze without flinching. "No," she said softly. "I'm the woman who refused to stay silent." Ruth Harlan was led away through the parting crowd, her once powerful figure now small and defeated under the bright desert sun. Later that afternoon, in the quiet of the sheriff's office, the judge made it official. Emma Hayes was fully exonerated. Her father's name was cleared of any wrongdoing. The stolen gold would be returned where it belonged, and Ruth Harlan's property was seized pending trial in Tucson. As they stepped out into the golden light, Emma felt something inside her chest finally loosen. A knot she had carried since the day her father died. Colt walked beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. They stopped near the edge of town, where the new track stretched westward like a promise. "I didn't save you just because it was right," Colt said quietly, looking out at the horizon. "I saved you because the moment I cut that rope, I realized I didn't want to lose you. Not then. Not ever." Emma turned to him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they were different. Warmer. "I was so afraid to trust anyone again," she whispered. "But you stayed, even when it cost you." Colt reached out slowly and took her hand. His touch was gentle, careful, as if he was still afraid she might pull away. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma." She stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest. For the first time in months, the weight on her shoulders felt bearable. Weeks later, the little front room on Main Street opened its doors again. A simple wooden sign hung above it, Hayes Remedies. Emma stood inside, arranging jars of dried herbs and bottles of willow bark tonic. She treated a ranch hand's sprained wrist, then gently examined a Navajo woman's sick child, speaking softly in both English and the few words of Apache she had learned from Jeremiah. Colt leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with quiet pride. No longer the distant protector, but a man standing beside his wife. Steady, present, real. Tommy Reed swept the floor with a grin, while Jeremiah Gray occasionally stopped by to share stories and repair broken tools. The desert wind still blew, but now it carried the scent of healing instead of fear. Justice had come late to Iron Junction, but it had come, and in its wake something even stronger had taken root. Hope, forgiveness, and the quiet courage of ordinary people who chose to stand together when it mattered most. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.